asking my boyfriend to choose between me and his work wife after catching them joking about our sex life? I, 29F, have been in a committed relationship with my boyfriend, Chris, 31M, for 5 years. Chris is, in many ways, an incredible partner. He's funny, kind, and deeply supportive of me in many aspects of my life. However, there's one issue that has been causing increasing tension in our relationship. His close relationship with his coworker, Jess, 30F, who he refers to as his work wife. To give some context, Chris works in a tight-knit office environment, and Jess has been his coworker and friend for several years. Initially, I wasn't bothered by their friendship. I understand that work friendships can form naturally when people spend so much time together. In fact, I encouraged him to cultivate healthy relationships at work, knowing how important a positive work environment is for overall well-being. But over the years, their relationship has grown into something that makes me feel increasingly uncomfortable. For starters, Jess and Chris communicate constantly. It's not limited to work hours. She frequently texts him at night, on weekends, and even during our date nights. While some of the texts are clearly about work, many are not. They share memes, have inside jokes, and talk about things that leave me feeling like an outsider. Whenever we attend events with his co-workers, Jess is always by his side, laughing at his jokes and acting like she knows him better than anyone else. While Chris is naturally charismatic and draws people to him, Jess's presence often feels too close for comfort. It's not just her behavior that bothers me, but Chris's apparent willingness to encourage it. One incident stands out from earlier in our relationship. At a work gathering, Jess introduced herself to me as Chris's work wife. The people around us laughed, so I forced myself to laugh too, though the term stung deeply. Later, when I brought it up with Chris, he dismissed my feelings, telling me it was just a joke and that I was overthinking things. He insisted there was no romantic element to their friendship, and at the time, I reluctantly let it go. However, things came to a head last weekend at a party hosted by one of Chris's co-workers. I was mingling with other guests when I overheard a conversation between Chris and Jess in the kitchen. Jess made a joke about how Chris must be exhausted because I keep him up all night. Chris laughed and replied with something like, "Yeah, she's got a lot of energy." The two of them laughed together, completely oblivious to my presence nearby. I froze. I couldn't believe they were joking about our sex life, and in such a public setting. It felt deeply disrespectful and humiliating, not just because of what was said but because it was Jess, someone whose closeness with Chris had already been a sore spot for me. When we got home, I confronted Chris about the incident. To his credit, he admitted that the joke was in bad taste, but brushed off my concerns, saying I was blowing the situation out of proportion. He framed it as harmless banter and insisted that there was nothing to it. That conversation led to a larger argument about Jess and their relationship. I told Chris that I was no longer comfortable with the dynamic they shared and that he needed to set some clear boundaries with her. I explained that it wasn't just about the joke, but about the cumulative effect of their interactions, which made me feel like a third wheel in my own relationship. Chris's response was frustrating. He accused me of being insecure and controlling. He reiterated that there was nothing romantic between him and Jess and suggested that I was creating unnecessary drama. When I pressed further, asking how he would feel if the roles were reversed and I had a male work husband with whom I shared similar jokes and intimacy, he hesitated but ultimately brushed off the comparison. At this point, I gave Chris an ultimatum. I told him that he needed to either establish firm boundaries with Jess or risk losing our relationship. To me, this wasn't about making him choose between Jess and me. It was about respecting the boundaries and trust that should exist in a committed partnership. I emphasized that I wasn't asking him to end their friendship entirely but to reevaluate the nature of their interactions and prioritize our relationship over what seemed like an inappropriate dynamic. Chris, however, doubled down on his stance, insisting that I was being unreasonable. He accused me of trying to dictate his friendships and refused to have a deeper conversation about the issue. His refusal to take my feelings seriously has left me feeling hurt and alienated. Since that argument, I've sought advice from friends. Their opinions are divided. Some believe I'm overreacting and that Jess's presence in Chris's life isn't a threat to our relationship. They argue that Chris and I have been together for 5 years, and if he wanted to be with Jess, he would have pursued her by now. Others, however, agree with me and think that Chris's lack of boundaries with Jess is disrespectful and damaging to our relationship. I'm torn. On one hand, I don't want to be the kind of partner who dictates who their significant other can and can't be friends with. I value independence in relationships and understand that we each need our own social circles. On the other hand, I can't shake the feeling that the dynamic between Chris and Jess crosses a line. It's not just about their closeness, It's about how their relationship makes me feel excluded, disrespected, and undervalued. The incident with the joke about our sex life feels like a tipping point. It's one thing for Chris and Jess to share a close friendship, but it's another for them to make light of something so personal and intimate. It's made me question whether Chris truly understands or respects my boundaries and whether he's willing to make changes to preserve our relationship. At this point, I'm considering taking a step back to reevaluate our relationship. I've asked Chris for time to think and have temporarily moved in with a friend to gain some clarity. While I still love him deeply, I'm struggling with the idea of staying in a relationship where my feelings are dismissed and my concerns about boundaries are minimized. I'm not sure what the future holds, but one thing is clear. I can't continue to be in a relationship where I feel like I'm competing for my partner's attention and respect. Whether or not Chris and I can move past this depends on his willingness to listen, understand, and make changes to ensure that our relationship feels like a true partnership, free from unnecessary interference or emotional entanglements with others. Others say I'm totally justified, especially after that joke. Let's read some comments. First comment was, Jess shouldn't know anything about their sex life. That's not even almost an appropriate conversation to be having with anyone in a work environment. It's not insecurity when the woman's marking her territory when his long-term girlfriend is in the room and texting him all hours of the day. I say this in a lot of these posts, but the lack of insight and respect some people have is deplorable. If OP had a work husband, I loathe that term, and he was pulling the same stunts, he'd be peeved and saying the same thing OP is. The fact that she's bold enough to introduce herself to OP as his work wife makes me think she's far too comfortable with how things are and that she's confident he'll do exactly what he did, defend her and gaslight OP that it's nothing and she's being silly. That patronizing crap alone would have set me off. It's not silly, it's incredibly disrespectful. Second comment was, I work at a large corporate software company and I would never imagine referring or having someone refer to me as their work husband. Even outside of the cringy grossness, I'd be worried about HR. Not to mention progressing in the company, how others view me, etc., because this can absolutely stifle any growth. So I've deducted this as some real gross little company if all his friends are laughing about it and not telling him to STFU and her also because we're professionals. Sound like a bunch of college kids working there part-time. Third comment was, 5 years and he wouldn't agree to some boundaries after joking about your sex life to coworkers? I feel like him going to you're insecure and controlling instead of him looking at his friendship and evaluating if it's crossed some lines is a little telling. It doesn't sound like you asked him to cut her off, so his reaction makes me think that your intuition isn't wrong and maybe you need to figure out what you are willing to take in a relationship. She replied to third comment was, I never asked him to cut her off as they are friend for a long time. I just want him to set some boundaries as I don't want him talking about our intimate moments with her. There are things which should stay between the two of us and he should not share them with anyone else. Fourth comment was, your feelings are valid and your BF is ignoring them and borderline gaslighting you with his excuses. Regardless of the work wife, if he behaves in a way that makes you uncomfortable, particularly where his behavior is objectively disrespectful, and he refuses to take responsibility or acknowledge your feelings, you might want to reevaluate your relationship. She replied to the fourth comment was, I hope he just gets my point of view and sets some boundaries, otherwise our relationship won't last. Thank you for listening the story to the end. If you enjoy our videos, so don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Have a good day, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do.